Being a fan of the NHL, some of the most exciting times are seeing one of these gentlemen on your Twitter feed breaking the news of a trade, whether it's a trade involving some AHL players and some late draft picks, dead contracts, or whether it's a trade involving players the caliber of Taylor Hall, for instance. I still can't believe this trade happened. A trade is a trade nonetheless, and it's still a very exciting time for hockey fans. So in today's video, I kind of want to go back and look at some of the more recent one-for-one trades over the past couple of years and give you guys my thoughts on who I think won the trade and just look at how it turned out for both sides. So without wasting any more time, let's jump right into the video. The first one-for-one deal we're going to look at is obviously the one that a lot of people like to point to when we talk about some of the worst trades in recent memory, and that is Taylor Hall being traded to the New Jersey Devils straight up in a one-for-one deal for defenseman Adam Larsson. Now, Adam Larsson was a top pick and is a solid top four defenseman, but he's not even close to the caliber of a player that Taylor Hall is, and it is kind of difficult to compare a defenseman and a forward, but even still, Taylor Hall is miles ahead of Adam Larsson, and I'm sure if you ask 31 general managers in the NHL who they would rather have, it's 100% Taylor Hall. And I guess that does kind of suck for Adam Larsson because it's not like he's a bad player. I think he is a solid and reliable top four defenseman, but just because of the fact that he was traded straight up for Taylor Hall, I feel like he's never really going to get the credit that he deserves for being a solid NHL player, because after Taylor Hall was traded to the Devils, he went on to win the league's MVP in the 2017-18 season and is one of the best wingers in the entire NHL. But at the time for Edmonton, this kind of made sense, I guess, because they definitely did need some defense, and they had a plethora of young talent. You had guys like Jordan Eberle there still, Leon Draisaitl, they were getting Connor McDavid, but even still, I just can't fathom the fact that they ended up trading Taylor Hall and not getting like at least an all-star caliber defenseman in return. And now let's take a look at some of the stats of these guys before and after they were traded, starting with Adam Larsson, and obviously he is a defenseman and you don't expect him to put up big numbers. 274 games played for the New Jersey Devils, 9 goals and 60 assists for 69 points, and in his career with the Oilers, 255 games played, 11 goals and 41 assists for 52 points. And again, he's never a guy that is supposed to put up a lot of points like 40 to 50. He's not like an offensive defenseman by any means, but he is a solid two-way defender who can chip in some offense here and there, and obviously that is not near enough in return for a guy like Taylor Hall, who in his career with Edmonton was still very good. He had 328 points in 381 career games, and then after being traded to New Jersey, he's over a point per game there with 185 points in 184 games played. And to top that all off, he does have a Hart Trophy with the Devils. He really has carved himself out a fantastic career even with Edmonton, and especially after the trade to New Jersey. So yes, it is safe to say, not beating a dead horse here, that Edmonton came out as massive losers in this deal. June 23rd, 2012, a date that I'm sure makes Leafs fans feel all warm and fuzzy inside, because that is the date that this trade happened. James Van Riemsdyk being sent to the Toronto Maple Leafs in exchange for Luke Schenn. Luke Schenn being the 5th overall pick by the Leafs in 2008, and James Van Riemsdyk being the 2nd overall pick by the Philadelphia Flyers in 2007. So when this trade happened, it was basically like Philadelphia needed a defenseman and they wanted to take a shot at Luke Schenn, who wasn't really working out the greatest for the Toronto Maple Leafs, but still trading James Van Riemsdyk for him, kind of a baffling move, because James Van Riemsdyk in his first stint with the Philadelphia Flyers was pretty solid. In his first 2.5 years with them, he had a 20-goal season, 40 points, and was still very, very young, but then eventually he was traded to the Toronto Maple Leafs and he had some very, very good years with the Leafs. His career high of 62 points coming in the 2016-17 season. He had a 36-goal year in the 2017-18 year. He's just a guy who everyone loved in Toronto, was definitely a fan favorite there, and this trade definitely worked out in the long run for Toronto. Even though JVR is no longer with them, he spent a lot more time with the Leafs than Luke Schenn spent with the Flyers. Now looking at both players' stats before and after the trade, and again, like the Taylor Hall and Adam Larsson trade, and comparing their stats, it's kind of difficult because one's a forward and one's a defenseman. Forwards are supposed to put up points, defensemen not so much, and especially Luke Schenn, even when he was drafted, he was never really supposed supposed to become an offensive dynamo of a defenseman. But starting off with Luke Schenn, 310 games for the Leafs, 14 goals, 61 assists for 75 points, and that wouldn't be bad if he was playing an excellent two-way game, but over the course of his career with the Leafs, he just wasn't. And then after the trade to Philadelphia, 213 games, 12 goals, and 30 assists for 42 points, so definitely not a good stint in Philly. And then looking at JVR's numbers before the trade, 99 points in 196 games, still a very young player at the time of the deal. And then in his career with Toronto, 413 games, so 200 more games played with Toronto than Luke Schenn had with the Flyers, 154 goals, 140 assists for 294 points. Definitely a big part of Toronto's franchise over those years and definitely a fan favorite there. And then obviously he did sign with the Philadelphia Flyers as a free agent last summer, so it was nice to see him go back to the team that drafted him. But Toronto definitely takes a massive W on this trade, even though both players are no longer with the team they were traded to. Moving on to the next trade we're going to talk about in today's video. This one actually came within the same hour as the Taylor Hall for Adam Larsson deal. That was definitely a crazy day in the hockey world. Shea Weber being traded to the Montreal Canadiens in exchange for PK Subban, a straight up 1-for-1 deal. And this one is definitely a little bit easier to compare because it's not a forward and a defenseman. It's two defensemen, they have the same jobs, and it's a lot easier to compare than, say, a forward for a defenseman swap like we saw in the previous two trades I talked about. But at the time of this trade, a lot of people thought that the Nashville Predators were the clear-cut winners. PK Subban, the younger player, he had won a Norris Trophy with the Montreal Canadiens and was very solid for them on the ice, but it seems like the relationship off the ice just got a little bit toxic, and the Montreal Canadiens wanted to move on from that, and they acquired Shea Weber, who was the older player, but was coming off a very good season with the Nashville Predators, and over the course of his career with Nashville, he was one of the best defensemen in the entire NHL, a guy who could run a power play like no one else and was very good in terms of his two-way game as well. But now looking back at it, what does Nashville have to show for this trade? They basically traded Subban away as a salary cap dump to sign Matt Duchene, and now the Montreal Canadiens still have Shea Weber. He's playing pretty solid for them and is the captain and a massive part of that team. And now looking at each player's stats before and after the trade, starting with Shea Weber, his career with Nashville was very, very good. 443 points in 763 career games. Like I said earlier, arguably one of the best defensemen in the league over that time of his career. And then after the trade to Montreal, 93 points in 165 games. He's finally healthy this year, and I think Shea Weber could definitely be in for a big year, kind of like a vintage Shea Weber year. And then looking at Subban, 278 points in his career with Montreal in 434 games, a great offensive defenseman for them and a solid two-way guy as well, and he had 130 points in 211 games with Nashville. Again, he's no longer with Nashville and they don't really have much to show for this trade, so I definitely would give the edge to Montreal, especially looking at it long term, but that isn't taking away anything Subban did for Nashville because he was relatively solid for them over his entire stint there after the trade. Getting back to the theme of swapping a forward for a defenseman, we have the Ryan Johansson for Seth Jones straight up deal. Now this trade is definitely an interesting one, and it was one that Nashville definitely could afford to make because they had such an amazing decor. You had guys like Ryan Ellis, who was up and coming. I believe at the time they still had Shea Weber, I'm pretty sure, and they also had Roman Josi, Ryan Ellis, Mattias Ekholm, all those guys, a stacked decor, and they could definitely afford to give away a guy like Seth Jones. And they didn't just give him away, they brought back a really good centerman in Ryan Johansson, who has been very good for them, playing that number one center role since the trade. And now this year there isn't so much pressure on him because they brought in Matt Duchene, and they kind of have like a 1A, 1B, 1-2 punch kind of thing going there, and I think it is working out really well for them. Obviously, if I had to declare a winner for this trade, I think it would be Columbus because I feel like Seth Jones is amazing, has the potential to be like a top 3 defenseman in the entire NHL, definitely a guy who I think will win a couple of Norris trophies over the course of his career. And now taking a look at both of these guys' stats before and after the trade, Seth Jones in Nashville, 63 points in 199 career games. He was never going to get the opportunity there to break out and become a superstar defenseman because there were so many talented defensemen in that Nashville blue line. And then after the trade to Columbus, 166 points in 272 games, is really like the face of the franchise now and is arguably one of the top defensemen in the league already and is still only going to continue to get better. And then looking at Johansson, 193 points in 309 games played for Columbus was very good for them, but after the trade, he definitely completed his all-around game, got better, and became a fantastic playmaking number one center there, 216 points in 286 games, and is still a massive part of that team. So this is definitely a trade that I think in the long run definitely worked out well for both sides, but if you had to ask me, I would definitely rather have Seth Jones right now than Ryan Johansson. And now, finishing out the video with the Max Domi for Alex Galchenyuk swap, one of the more recent ones we're going to talk about, and this is definitely a trade where at the time a lot of people thought Arizona were 100% going to come out on top. Galchenyuk, already a guy who scored 30 goals, and Max Domi was coming off a pretty bad offensive season, but after the trade, everybody knows what happened. Max Domi broke out and became the best forward on that Montreal Canadiens team, and Alex Galchenyuk just had a decent year in Arizona, and then obviously this past summer, the Coyotes decided to flip Galchenyuk to bring in a guy like Phil Kessel, so I guess it still worked out for them because now they have a guy the caliber of Phil Kessel, but still, looking back on this, I think Montreal does come out on top because now they finally have that great young forward that they've been looking for such a long time. And now, taking a look at these guys' stats before and after the trade, Galchenyuk in 418 games in Montreal had 255 points, and then after the trade, obviously only spent 1 year with the Coyotes, 72 games played, 19 goals, and 22 assists for 41 points, so a decent year, but definitely overshadowed by how great Max Domi was in his first year in a Habs uniform. Domi, before the trade with Arizona, 135 points in 226 games played, and then his career so far with Montreal, 85 games, 29 goals, and 45 assists for 75 points, and yes, you definitely could make the argument that if Domi had stayed in Arizona, he probably would have never became the player that he is right now, and that definitely is a good point, but even still, I think Montreal hands down comes out on top of this deal. So that's going to wrap up today's video. I really hope you guys did enjoy. If you guys do want to see more videos like this, make sure to let me know down in the comment section below. Thank you guys so much for all the support on the channel lately. I really do appreciate it. And if you guys did enjoy today's video, please make sure to drop a like on it and subscribe to the channel for daily NHL content. And I will see you guys all in tomorrow's video.